Hey there guys, how's it going? Back with another video. So today I wanted to talk about the upcoming Cruiserweight title fight between Mairis Briedis and Yuniel Dorticos. This fight's finally been made and it's going to be taking place in March. Now, it seems like a long time since this fight was first announced. If you guys, hadn't been paying attention, the fight was supposed to happen last year as part of the World Boxing Super Series final. However, it got delayed for one reason or another that I really can't be bothered getting into right now. But yeah, the two guys were set to fight, and yeah, there were some issues that kept them from finalizing it, and then finally it's been made. It's going to be taking place in Riga, Latvia, so they have a venue. It's the same place that both of these guys fought their last fight. Um, Briedis, of course, had the infamous victory over Krzysztof Glowacki, which wasn't without controversy, which we will discuss as we go on in the video. And Yuniel Dorticos had probably the best performance of his career and completely took apart and knocked out Andrew Tabiti, who was kind of a slippery, difficult, awkward guy to fight, with good defense and quick hands and just a very negative, awkward style. And I felt that the way that Dorticos broke him down and brutally knocked him out, that was a very efficient and very effective performance from him, probably the best performance of his career so far. And as far as how Briedis looked, he had a brutal knockout, of course, against Glowacki, and I thought he was very good in the fight. However, it's just that the issue with that fight was the issue of the officiating. And to sum up how that fight went and how it pissed off a lot of people, basically, just to recap, Briedis was hit behind the head, so it was Glowacki who initiated the fouls, and immediately Briedis responded with an elbow to the head. And Briedis, of course, has a background in Muay Thai and kickboxing, so he's a slick martial artist and he's instinctive in regards to responding to fouls. So he just elbowed him in the face and dropped him, and from that point on, the writing was on the wall. Glowacki was on his way out. Briedis dropped him again with a right hand, and was jumping in with power shots from distance, and it was a actually a very brutal performance from Briedis. I thought he was very sharp and very accurate, but then towards the end of the round, after Glowacki had been dropped and was barely hanging on, the bell went, and the referee Robert Bird allowed the action to continue, and apparently didn't hear the bell, despite the fact most people at ringside did hear the bell. So it was a crazy situation. Briedis went on to swiftly take Glowacki out in the very next round, so it was a third round stoppage. And although that fight was for the vacant WBO title, the WBO actually withdrew the belt because of the controversy and ordered a rematch and whatnot. So perhaps that rematch will take place at some point. And yeah, I look forward to maybe seeing it, but I definitely do favour Briedis in the rematch. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about this fight. Now, going into this fight, I've noticed many people's opinions have been split. A lot of people seem to favour Briedis very highly. A lot of people favour Dorticos. A lot of people think that Dorticos right now is just in a better place mentally for his career. However, I'm going to be as blunt with this one as possible, guys. For as long as I've thought about this fight, and even when it was first announced, and before it was signed, and before we knew where it was going to be taking place and everything, I have always favoured Mairis Briedis to win this fight. I'm picking him to beat Yuniel Dorticos, and I'm picking him to do so either by a decision or a late stoppage. And let's discuss it. Now, obviously, both of these guys have the power to knock each other out. Okay, Dorticos has had some very impressive knockouts, like the knockout against Apiti. He also knocked out Dmitry Kudryashov. He stopped Yuri Kalenga. He stopped a lot of fighters, although weirdly he did go the distance against a completely shot, blown up middleweight Edison Miranda, who I used to be quite a fan of back in the day. Edison Miranda back when he was at middleweight and whatnot. That dude was a monster. Like, he was a really big puncher, but a limited fighter technically. However, what's really weird about that is Edison Miranda was knocked out, and I remember this. He was knocked out brutally by Arthur Abraham. He was also knocked out by by Kelly Pavlik. These are at middleweight. He was, I believe, I remember rightly. Yeah, I watched it live. He was stopped by Tony Bellew at light heavyweight. I remember that fight. He quit against Tony Bellew in the 9th round after getting dropped. So Edison Miranda going the distance against Yuniel Dorticos is a really weird one. I'm not quite sure how that happened. It was very strange. I think maybe Dorticos just had an off night, or Miranda was just very negative in that fight, whatever. But yeah, that's a weird one, that. But putting that fight aside, Dorticos has always shown power. He's knocked pretty much everybody out, other than his loss to Gassiev, where he himself got knocked out in a great fight in the 12th round. And even in that fight, he showed power. He did manage to back up Gassiev here and there, and he also showed a granite chin with the shots that Gassiev was landing on him. And I thought he showed a lot of stamina and a granite chin, although he did waste a lot of energy. And wasting his energy is something that he's been guilty of in the past, like where he fought. Was it Mateus Mastanok that he fought, where he gassed in the later rounds and got beat up a bit? Yeah, he has struggled to be economical with his punches here and there. But against Tabiti, he was very measured, and he picked his shots, and he won that fight by using his power in a very skillful and methodical way. He was much more, the word I'm looking for, he was much more economical with his punches in that fight, and I think that was why he was able to win so convincingly. And he's definitely going to need to be like that to have a chance against Briedis. Now, as for Briedis, Briedis is becoming one of the most hated men in boxing. I've noticed a lot of my subscribers don't like Briedis. Personally, I like Briedis. I'm a big fan of the guy. I have been for several years, and I mean, this is a guy who, to me, has shown elite level technical skills. Okay, when he went up to heavyweight, he was knocking out bigger guys. For example, he knocked out Manuel Char in a much more quicker and more efficient fashion than Povetkin did. And I believe that was in the 5th round, and he knocked him out with sort of a lead half hook, half uppercut. And Manuel Char's a pretty tough guy, with some decent skills himself. So I think that Mairis Briedis, to me, has shown, just in terms of his technique and his balance and his, the way that he's able to get to the target a lot quicker and a lot more accurately than a lot of other cruiserweights. I think, to me, he's shown a lot of skill and a lot of potential. The problem is that in some of his more recent fights, he's just been a little bit off. Now, when he fought No Gevor, and that was the fight that he, in my opinion, should have lost, he got a gift decision. In that fight, a lot of people afterwards were writing Briedis off, and I noticed that after that fight, and I said this at the time, a lot of people seemed to think that he was going to lose to Glavatsky. A lot of people were picking Glavatsky, who looked very good on that same undercard as Briedis. When he beat the Russian Maxim Vlasov on points and dropped him multiple times. A lot of people going into the Briedis Glavatsky fight were picking Glavatsky, but I said at the time, even then, I said that I favoured Briedis big over Glavatsky, and I picked Briedis to beat Glavatsky by stoppage, because to me Glavatsky was too flat-footed and too set in his ways in terms of the way he fights, being a stocky pressure fighter. And I felt that the power from distance from Mairis Briedis, the way that Mairis Briedis moves around the ring and jumps in with power shots, kind of like an ambush fighter, I didn't think that Glavatsky could handle that. And of course that was right. Glavatsky got taken out and stopped. Controversy aside, I still think that Mairis Briedis would have won that fight, and I'd still pick him in a rematch. And let's not forget, Mairis Briedis gave Usyk one of the toughest fights of his career. So Mairis Briedis being able to go, to go toe to toe with Usyk the way he did, being able to knock out Manuel Char, the experience he has in martial arts and kickboxing and whatnot, being able to take out Simon Vallily over in the UK, who was undefeated, being able to completely outbox and school Marco Huck in his backyard. I think Mairis Briedis is very underrated. I've always felt, as long as I've watched him, that he's a very underrated fighter. One of the most underrated fighters in boxing. And without a doubt, probably the most underrated fighter at cruiserweight. So I think Briedis is very good. And I just don't see, looking at these two guys next to each other and how they both fight, I don't see a way that Dorticos could outbox Mairis Briedis. I can't see that happening. I think that Dorticos is too basic and he's way too limited. Defensively, Dorticos is very open. Just what I want you guys to do, even in some of Dorticos' best performances, look at like the Kudryashov fight. Look at the Kalenga fight. Look at all these fights. Yuniel Dorticos, whereas he's powerful and he's got a good chin, he is very easy to hit. That's one thing I've noticed about Dorticos is he kind of reminds me of Antonio Margarito in the sense, another example would be like a Jaime Munguia, somebody like that. He's a guy who's very powerful and he's very big for the weight, but he gets hit so easily. Like against Glavatsky couldn't miss with that lead left hook to the body and to the head, and like he was constantly jumping in with hooks and Dorticos to me made no defensive adjustments whatsoever, and he was so easy to hit and he was so easy to piece up with combinations, and he's a guy who blocks punches with his face. He's kind of like like I said, Antonio Margarito, even like a Marius Wack, a guy who relies on his chin, like a Jake LaMotta, but without the skill. He's a guy who to me is so front foot heavy and falls so in love with his power and his chin that he just is vulnerable to me, to a slick boxer with good power. And as we saw in the Gassiev fight, that didn't suit him well, did it? Because he took an absolute pasting in that fight, took a beating, and got brutally knocked out in the 12th round. So to me, he's gonna struggle with the technical skills of Mairis Briedis. Mairis Briedis has got enough experience at this point for me to confidently say if this goes 12 rounds, Briedis wins on points. Briedis is just so much more skilled. I think he has faster hands too. And I'm not even taking into consideration yet that the fact that the fight's in Briedis' hometown, in Riga, Latvia. So if it's close on the scorecards, being at home with a big crowd is going to maybe influence the judges. I'm not saying there's corruption involved. I'm just saying that it's a possibility that he may get the benefit of the doubt, might get a slight hometown decision, and he might have the hometown confidence. Some fighters when they fight at home, they're much more confident and they perform a lot better. I think of fighters like Arthur Abraham, for example. Fighters. There's too many examples, but fighters where they've fought on the road and have been a little bit timid, but when they fight at home, they seem to be more confident and seem to have more energy. Briedis strikes me as that type of fighter, and when he fought Nolgevor and people were writing him off, like one of the things that I pointed out, and I pointed this out in my post fight review for that fight, I believe I did. I pointed out that if you look at how that fight went, yeah, in the early rounds he was getting schooled, and clearly he wasn't there. He wasn't there 100%. Like his timing was off, his stamina wasn't great, and he clearly hadn't had the right sparring, and he was clearly injured going into the fight, which we didn't know about prior to the fight. But it was revealed later that he was nursing an injury during his training camp, so he wasn't able to spar or have an intense training camp, or at least as intense as it usually would be. So he was kind of off that night. He wasn't on his game. But if you look at the later rounds of that fight, look at the 11th round or the 12th round, and again I pointed this out in my review for the fight. He was outboxing Nolgevor in those later rounds. He actually did figure Nolgevor out, and he started to outland him. And I thought the 12th round was a very good round for Briedis. Like he completely figured Nolgevor out by that point. So I think that if Nolgevor were to get a rematch with Briedis, I think Briedis would probably stop him, because I think we'd get a much sharper and much more prepared Briedis, who's more prepared for the style. And I actually think the same thing if he were to fight Mike Perez, because you remember in that fight, it was kind of a similar situation. Briedis apparently didn't have a great training camp, and he was still dealing with that injury. And, when he fought Mike Perez in the early rounds, he was having all sorts of trouble with the style, got cut from a headbutt, the southpaw stance was causing him trouble. But in the later rounds, he started to dominate Mike Perez, and he started to really figure him out, and he was outlanding him big in the later rounds. He was doing a much better job. Like the further that fight went on, the more dominant Briedis was. And I think he's an adaptive, reactive fighter. I think he's a very intellectual fighter. And when I look at Briedis' fight, I notice him making adjustments. I see him figuring out his opponents. And I honestly think this guy's excellent. I think he's a very underrated fighter. And I think people are selling him short. I think he's better than advertised. And I think he's going to beat Yuniel Dorticos. Despite the fact Dorticos might be the bigger puncher, I don't know about that because Briedis himself is a very big puncher. But I definitely think Briedis is quicker and more explosive. It's just that Dorticos might have naturally more heavy hands. I don't see Dorticos outboxing Briedis. I don't see him just going in there and doing a number on Briedis like he did to Kudryashov or like he did to Andrew Tabiti. I mean, even if you look at those fights, like look at the Kudryashov fight. Dorticos was getting hit. Okay, Kudryashov was landing jabs to the body. He was landing the right hand to the head a couple of times in the first round. And, Kudryashov, had he had the chin or the stamina to compete with somebody like Dorticos, he might have actually won that fight because he might have broke him down. And obviously, Andrew Tabiti was very small for the division, didn't have much power. But if he was a bigger guy and if he had more power, with the shots he landed and the way he was able to make Dorticos miss at times, he might have had more success in the fight. So I just think Dorticos to me relies too much on his physicality, whereas Briedis relies more on his boxing ring IQ. Just to me, he's the more cerebral fighter, and to me, he's the guy who I would definitely pick. If it was going the distance on the scorecards, you marry that with the fact that the fight's in his hometown. Briedis will have, potentially an advantage on the scorecards, and Briedis having the faster hands and the better footwork and balance, better defense. He's also got a decent chin. I don't think Briedis has never been knocked down. I mean, Usyk wasn't able to drop him. Glavatsky wasn't able to drop him. Manuel Chaw wasn't able to drop him. Simon Valili wasn't able to drop him. Heavy-handed guys that he's been in with haven't even really put a dent in him. Mike Perez. Again, Mike Perez was a former heavyweight. Guy with a lot of power. I remember Mike Perez winning prize fighter and whatnot. I remember him knocking out, Ty Fields, who was a big 6'9" giant, and he knocked him out in like 35 seconds or something. Mike Perez was a big guy and a big puncher. So, the fact that Briedis was able to take his punches shows me Briedis is pretty tough. I can't see Dorticos just going in there and stopping him in the early rounds. I can't see him blowing him away like he did to Kudryashov or like he did to Tabiti. I favour Briedis for this fight. I think he's going to beat Dorticos. I think it's most likely going to be on points. I see this being a points win. I think he's going to completely school him at times, from the outside. But I could see him having to survive a scare here and there, maybe holding on to avoid getting stopped, if he gets cut or he gets hurt. Because, I mean, Dorticos is very aggressive and he throws very hard straight punches. So it's going to be a great fight, man, while it lasts. But I just think that the more technically skilled fighter and the fighter with better defense and movement and power from distance while on the move and better jab, better overhand right, the way he whips it around the guard and he jumps in with that half hook, half uppercut that he can lead with from halfway across the ring. He can knock out heavyweights from distance. This is a very, very skilled fighter, and I see him outboxing Dorticos. Could I see him stopping Dorticos? Totally could happen. Totally could. But we'll just have to wait and see because Dorticos is very tough and has a very good chin and has improved a little bit since the defeat against Murat Gassiev. So I think this is a great fight. I'm picking Briedis to win, most likely on points, but a late stoppage wouldn't surprise me either. So either a late stoppage or a points win for Mairis Briedis. That's how I see this fight. Let me know how you guys think, and thanks for watching. God bless each and every one of you.